Excuse me. What are you doing out here, citizen? Aren't you aware there is a plague on? What? Don't tell me you don't know of the Black Plague. Please, come. I will explain to you the dire situation that we are in. I'm going to be explaining to you the nature of the Black Death, the Bubonic Plague, and sort of why it affected the 17th century so terribly. The reason I'm sharing this now is because, y'all, we're in the midst of a global pandemic. It's terrifying. But I want to share sort of how much better off we are now than people were back then. Not only have I always been fascinated with this disease because it's horrific but also kind of interesting from a bacterial standpoint, the reason this is interesting because of the lack of knowledge of the disease at the time, and because the plague affects 1,000 to 2,000 people still every year. And this is according to an article published by CNN. The bubonic plague, terrible infection and otherwise known as the Black Death. It affects the lymph nodes, which are right here, on your neck and in other parts of your body. And I'll be talking about what makes this disease so deadly. Back in the 17th century, during the second outbreak of the plague, those tasked with fighting back against the plague were called plague doctors. And you'll come to learn how they did more bad than good. And at the time, there was only one theory of medicine that was accepted, which was the miasma theory, which was incorrect, and we'll kind of talk about that. Now, the interesting thing is there are 3 types of plague. It's not just one disease, but they're all caused by a bacteria known as Yersinia pestis. Often transmitted by an infected flea bite, the disease progresses from bubonic to pneumonic to septicemic. The base stages of bubonic plague are a sudden onset of chills, headache, fever, weakness, and one or more swollen, tender, and painful lymph nodes, often called buboes. It'll be either in the neck, underneath the arms, or sometimes, unfortunately, in the groin area of an affected patient. This symptom list is in accordance to the CDC. If left untreated, the bacteria can then enter the lungs of a patient, leading to pneumonic plague, the symptoms of which are a bloody mucus, excessive coughing, difficulty breathing, and shortness of breath. And if this is left further untreated, the disease can progress into septicemic plague and infect the blood, which can cause delirium, gangrene of the extremities, which is when your fingertips and toes turn black and often have to be amputated. If somebody is diagnosed with septicemic plague and treatment is not immediately administered, death is very soon to follow. Luckily, antibiotics can kill the disease when it is only in its bubonic stage. Next up, my favorite, the plague doctors. We all know that this is a bad thing. We know what bacteria are, but this information had to start somewhere. Because nowadays, we have our cloth masks. Just put it on, keep you safe. We have our gas masks, if things get really hairy. Back in the day, those practicing in treating the plague, in addition to wearing a heavy overcoat, which was waxed to keep fluids from staining the doctors would wear a traditional beaked mask, the purpose of which was to keep bad air out. According to National Geographic, these masks were filled with a perfume with only 2 holes, one on each side of the nose, with the air that one breathes, the impression of the herbs enclosed further in the mask. This is believed to help ward off bad air that would come from the bodies of patients. Plague doctors also were known to experiment on their patients, giving them baths in acid and other caustic chemicals. They just didn't know. They were also allowed to perform autopsies on the bodies, which was considered taboo, but because they were given special permission by the church, to have very interesting diagrams of the skeletal structure, and even the beginnings of the cardiovascular system. Lastly, there was the bad air in the masks was designed to help ward off miasma, which was a theory at the time. You see, the miasma theory of medicine, according to an article published by ScienceMuseum.org, was the theory that diseases were caused by the presence of the air containing dead particles of bodies. The mask was stuffed. This mask typically was stuffed with herbs. I don't have them because they reek. They were designed to. It was thought that if the doctor breathed in these bad particles, this bad air, it would get them sick. And so, oftentimes, even to go even further beyond, opium would be enclosed in the mask, and to alter the mental state of the doctor. Uh, all in all, this disease was terrible, and it is kind of horrific what the doctors had to do to protect their patients. However, that being said, we're still leagues beyond. The germ theory has been accepted, and now that we actually know how these things affect us. I hope y'all are staying safe in quarantine. I hope y'all are doing safe, so good luck.